Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. We're taking a slightly different approach today. We're going to start on the computer and then we'll go to the car. Wanted to give a little bit of a background first, just to ground everyone on the 3000 GT and Dodge Stealth. These were available from 1990 through 1999 in the US markets. They continued through the year 2000 in Japan. They're also available in Europe with minor differences, most of it being configuration capabilities, safety features, and in some cases, turbocharger differences across the countries. In 1990 to 1993, they were also referred to as the Z16A chassis, and all of these featured all-wheel drive, all-wheel steering, where there's a steering wheel rack in the back, allows a few degrees of movement, a electronically controlled suspension, active exhaust in most cases. They're all powered by a 4-cam, 3-liter V6 Mitsubishi motor. The 1991s to 1992 and a halves roughly had a cam angle sensor, and it was a 2-bolt motor. From about June of 1992 and on, you're going to start seeing individual cam and crank sensors, forged cranks, and that'll be a 4-bolt motor in most cases. Now, you can swap cam and crank sensors between the motors. It is possible. There's a valve cover difference. Most of those 1993, if you will, model years will also have a 25 spline transfer case and output shaft versus the earlier years had an 18 spline. Difference being the 18 splines are a little bit weaker, but honestly, most of those have been converted at this point in time. It's a quick press operation on the transfer case, and you can swap the output shaft out of the transmission without actually pulling it. This is an example of a 91 on Bring a Trailer. Pretty nice example. I believe this one, 1,000 miles. Nice white one. Versus the 3000 GT sister car. This is another nice example. Differences will be active aero in the 3000 GT. These are all Mitsubishi cars. Chrysler handled the exterior styling on these, but these were all built in Nagoya, Japan, and shipped over. Whether you are in Canada or the States or over in Europe. I don't believe the Stealths were over there in Europe, but someone correct me in the wrong if I'm comments. They also should have had a 13G turbo in most cases. At least there was a sport turbo upgrade available on their 3000 GTs. So anyway, that's the first gens. Now, in 94, roughly, through about 97, you start seeing these pop up. No pop-up headlights. They are now available with 2-wheel steering. That's called a Z15A, or the Z16A chassis continued for the 4-wheel steering. So if you're familiar with chassis codes, that means the drivetrain is essentially the same. The chassis code didn't change, Z16A to Z16A. And really, there's not a lot of big differences. The removal of the pop-up headlights, these are all, of course, being after June of 92 production, all going to have 4-bolt motors. Now, a big difference they did do is now you're starting getting a 6-speed Getrag transmission versus a 5-speed Getrag transmission. There's some inherent differences there. The 6 speeds have a transfer case that's got a cast iron front housing. The 5 speeds do not, so the 5 speeds can tend to shatter under high power applications because, again, this is a 3,800 pound car with 90s technology. There was also a bump in power. These first gens have about 300 horse and 300 foot-pounds of torque, respectively, give or take. The second gens have 320 horsepower or so. So there's a slight difference here. Biggest difference would be a little bit of boost pressure change. I believe in Japan there's some MIVAC introduction as well. You don't really see that much in the States, and that's what I'm most familiar with. And the quarter miles change. These typically run high 13s. With a boost controller and a downpipe, you can get them into the 12-second range, which back in the day was pretty quick. These second gens come out of the box mid-13s. They get going a little bit faster. Now, 1996 was the last year for the Dodge Stealth in the States and everywhere for that matter. Big difference here. You can see no pop-up headlights and as well as this taller rear spoiler. These are also the latest Stealths available. I believe maybe 150, 200 pounds lighter than the rest. Very coveted car, very low production. 97, then there was another facelift, slight model differences. I didn't find a good picture on Google that I found, but the creme de la creme, if you will, the cultivations of the 3000 GTs are the 99s. This is the last year they're available in the States. You can see the headlights, more bubbly, bubblier turn signals, more aggressive front bumper. Of course, the combat wing. This was pretty bold styling back in 1999. This is a great example. And man, COVID time pricing, this is a really low price on this vehicle unless it's got 300,000 miles on it. Anyway, 99 was the last time you could get one in the States, and Japan was 2000. So that's a little bit about the cars. They are a GT car and really a Japanese supercar from back in the 90s. They are equivalent and marketed against the FD-RX-7, 300ZX twin turbo, uh, and of course the Toyota Supra. NSX was thrown in as well from Acura or Honda, depending upon where you are. And all these cars all were under that gentleman's agreement of 280 PS or 300 horsepower, and they all did it slightly differently. These cars do have a bad rap though, because, well, one, they're not as popular as, say, the Toyota Supras, but they're very mechanically challenging. So before we get to the video, let's go a little bit about the engine. It's a good cutaway view, and this is all packaged in the front of the vehicle here. But Mitsubishi in the 90s used a carbon vortex sensor, which essentially means air is coming through here, being measured and straightened through honeycombs. But you can see it's going to run, and they don't really have, here's the intercooler piping, or the intake piping rather. So air is going to come in here, split to the front turbocharger and then the rear turbocharger, come out of the turbochargers, run along piping. Now this front one comes in here, runs to the passenger side or right side of the vehicle, and then comes up to this Y pipe and then comes in. Now on the rear, there is a pipe that runs along here, turbo right about here, comes out the back, runs along the top, comes in here and comes out. So what are some things to look out for in these engines? Well, one, it's a quad cam motor. Interference. So timing belts have to be maintained. Hydraulic tensioner, have to maintain the timing belts on these. From a drivability standpoint, because the air sensor is way up here, and it's not like a lot of modern cars where it's speed density. This is the air is calculated, if you will, but air boost leaks between here and the throttle body, between the sensor throttle body, this is detrimental to performance. So boost leak checks, where you pressurize the intake system either at the turbos or ideally pre-turbo with a little bit of air pressure, and try to find air leaks, critical for maintaining proper running in these vehicles. I can't tell you how many over the years I've run across that are running poorly, and it's solely due to air leaks. Very simple to fix, very difficult to find. These intercoolers are buried down in the front bumper. Now, they can sometimes get damaged from the front. On your inspections, look outside the fog lights, there'll be little holes. If you see a lot of impact, just like impact to a radiator, there's a chance they're leaking. So you're going to want to try to figure out pressure testing. There's also some corrosion at the end tanks right here, and sometimes right at the fittings. Most of the time it's up here, so these clamps, very rarely are they worked on in original condition. May have to swap them out, but these are common sources of air leaks. There's hard piping in the engine bay right around here and over here, right in here. Typically where the soft hoses connect, there's a leak, and then in the rear turbocharger, there's an O-ring that sits in there. That's usually a common source of leak. Every once in a while, the intake tracks themselves will leak, so pay attention to that. Between the turbocharger, there's a rubber piece that slips in between the intake and the turbo. The inlet of these US 9B turbos is very small, but there's a rubber piece that slips in there, so make sure that's in place as well. In Europe, and I believe Japan, correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, you could order a sport turbo upgrade, which is a 13G turbo. Again, pretty small. I do not recall if those have that little bit of rubber grommet. And if I pull the intakes on the sample car in the shop, I'll show that. But if I don't, I won't. But when you're looking these vehicles over, especially if you're going to check the health of the turbo, just be cognizant that there's a rubber piece that's supposed to be in there. They tend to grade over time or get lost. Make sure it gets put on there. Put it on the turbo first, then slip the intake on. If you slip it inside the intake and shove it on, you run the chance of it running through the turbocharger. Lastly, there's a mass of vacuum lines up here. They can all leak as well. Some are pre-throttle body, some are post-throttle body. They run to boost control, emissions, that sort of stuff. Just check that. That's the number one problem with these from a drivability standpoint, is called boost leaks. The second one is typical maintenance, spark plugs. The front three, you can get to pretty easily. The rear, you got to pull off the intake manifold. There's a variety of bolts. I'll go over that in a future video because we're going to do plugs and wires on this car because it does have a slight misfire. It does run well enough that I don't think it's anything detrimental. Just needs basic maintenance. Lastly, we'll talk about the drivetrain because I don't think I'll get this one up in the air. I'm doing fluids. But this is a little bit of layout. Now, this is a right-hand drive one, so I'll try to reference this in left and right side as from the driver's seat of the vehicle because that's indifferent versus driver and passenger. So hopefully I won't mess that up. But transversely mounted motor. Here you can see kind of where that rear turbo is going to come up. And they got the outline of the intercoolers here. Getrag transmission, again, 5-speed and the 1Gs, 6-speed and the 2Gs. Power comes out, turns around, comes back through to the transfer case, runs down this 3-piece prop shaft and goes out to the rear. The 6-speeds have that cast iron transfer case, so when you peek underneath, if you see a cast iron transfer case, more than likely you've got a 6-speed. Of course, your shifter should be a 6-speed as well, but that's one way to verify. Is peek underneath, look for a cast iron right underneath the oil pan. 5-speeds are not cast iron. Now, in 1992 and a half, with the 4-bolt upgrade, they typically also go to a 25 spline transfer case. That one's a little more tough to tell visually without pulling the transfer case down. The earlier first generations had an 18 spline. They tend to break under hard launching. So this is a 3,800 pound car or so. Very easy to upgrade and change the transfer case, or sorry, the output shaft and the transfer case sleeve. It's a press operation. You can actually pull the output shaft without the transmission being removed off the vehicle. By and large, clutch jobs, everything comes out the bottom. Engines, everything comes out the top. The electronically controlled suspension, you can see here there'll be plug-ins and there'll be a ECS button to change between. I believe it's called Tour and Sport. There also is some dynamic changing based on vehicle position. I believe it ties into the yaw control. It's been a long time since I've been inside of one of the electronics on one of these. The Z16As, the 4-wheel steering, there's a rear rack here that the rear tires can articulate a little bit. The active exhaust, you may or may not see that flashing. All that is there's a valve back here on the left side of the chassis. There's a big muffler. There's a valve that the exhaust always flows through and out. When you open it, it allows exhaust to flow out the other pipe. That's a very easy diagnosis if the active exhaust is flashing. You come back here and you've got exhaust coming out this side, not this side. Odds are that valve's clogged. A little difficult to replace, a little hard to find, so you may have to come up with another solution. Electronic cutout welded in place might be it. These exhaust tips also do bolt on. They do fall off from time to time. They're held on, I believe, with probably a 10 millimeter head bolt. But that's a little bit about the chassis. So let's head over to the vehicle and we'll walk through some of that. All right, part one of 3000 GT inspections on this vehicle. As you can see, this is a mostly stock engine bay. Ideally, unless you have service records, this is what you want to see. So what are we looking at? Stock airbox. Now, Mitsubishi, they run a Karman Vortex sensor, which is essentially there's a honeycomb in there and the air needs to be perfectly straight when it runs in, otherwise the cars run poorly. Dropping a K&N filter in here is going to work just fine. You could put a mushroom filter on the air filter. There's an adapter. Honestly, you can start getting running and drivability issues with that. I'm seeing a lot of original equipment items here. All of this back here is all factory looking. So that's good to see. And we've got a slight misfire here, so we'll go through a boost leak test. OEM wires, a lot of OEM-ness to this thing. Yeah, OEM blow-off valve even down there. And for those of you who don't know, turbos are down there. So what am I looking at underneath here? Making sure there's a battery in the factory location. Making sure this bolt typically gets snapped a lot if the car's serviced often or not worked on correctly. So that's nice to have. Battery tie-down bracket. When these batteries go bad, they tend to rust down in here, so that's something to look at. The tray looks pretty decent, so I'm not going to say it's had a battery explode. A lot of this looks factory. We're going to check the timing belt cover here in a minute, and what you can do is you can pull these 210s, and then this front cover should come off. I probably have to undo the AC line as well. I can't remember if I can walk it past. I think I'll just undo that as well, so that's a 12. So 12, 210s, you can pull it off when you look at the belt. Now, it's important to know that the front cover slips over, or under rather. Yeah, it slips under the rear cover here.
It's a little lip. And there's a bolt back here for the rear cover. And that typically gets broken, and it looks like that's got an aftermarket bolt in it. So this has at least been done once. Yeah, we didn't do a tie down here, so that's not factory. Everything looks pretty clean though back here. So this is you know, other than the aftermarket suspension, of course, this looks pretty good. So let's get this cover off here, and we'll look at this timing belt. All right, so what are we looking at here? A couple of things. We're looking for signs if it's been worked on. So factory doesn't have orange RTV right here, so this front valve cover has been off at least once. I'm not sure why. We'll take a look under the oil cap. But this belt looks pretty darn decent. It's very supple. Not seeing any damages to the underside at all. And then you can peek down here and look at the water pump and see if I can get a light on that. Yeah, there's really no grooving, just a little bit, and all this looks pretty good. So I'm gonna say that this probably had one timing belt. You can see there's that rear piece I'm telling you about, and this has been pulled off as well because that factory bolt's supposed to have a head flange on it, and it doesn't, but that's okay. So this has been worked on at least once. You can see more of that RTV right there. And with it having the mileage it does, I'm gonna say this belt's not too terribly old. Again, it looks pretty decent. Now, this is where you have to make a decision. If there's not records of a timing belt, you may want to negotiate that. These are interference engines, and if that goes, you're bad. And as you can tell from the lack of space, it's kind of an involved job. This isn't too bad of a job. Now let's look underneath here and see what we got going on. Everything on this car is really tight and tidy. All right. Somewhat decent oil. We'll look at the level, but what I'm seeing is, yeah, it's a little bit dirty in here. Not the worst I've seen, but the cams at least look clean. Definitely, I've seen cleaner in the engine bay, or cleaner underneath the valve cover. I'd like to see that more of a tan color versus that brown. That cam cap is what I'm looking at, but it is what it is. Cams look decent, so let's talk about your fluids here, where you check them all. Obviously, oil dipstick here. On these, you cannot check the transmission fluid or the transfer case fluid levels, but I'll show you how to change those in another video. Your power steering's back here. Brake here. And on the US ones, there's this thing had ECS struts. This is that plug for the ECS struts, and it's disconnected because it's got these teens on it. The US versions have a clutch master cylinder back here, and this cruise control module is slightly relocated. See if we can find it. I bet you it's over here on this one. Yep, it's right here. So this is the clutch master cylinder washer fluid, which makes sense. It's going to be in line. And I'm missing one emissions piece here, and I believe this one's EGR. Yeah, this one's going to be catch can, and this one should be boost control solenoid, but I'll double check and circle back on the video if I'm wrong. So this one would be EGR. Usually there's one here on the US models. But everything looks pretty good underneath here. It just needs basic fluids, and I'll check and see if they want to do a timing belt or not. Now, someone may not let you check this, but I would recommend checking this if, and again, it's 2 10s and a 12 to loosen up this AC line. I would recommend checking this because this becomes a bargaining chip, and if they don't have records, you're definitely going to want to talk about this. This belt seems okay. I'm going to send it for now. Now, when you're putting this on, you see there's a lip there. You want to take the lip and you want to guide it right underneath that other one. So there's another timing belt cover in the back, and you want to guide it underneath. There you go. And then she'll slide right in. Now, to get this past, you don't want to force it. You just want to move this back a little bit, and it should slide right down. There we go. And now we're under. Now we're under and down. Perfect. See, it's underneath the lip there, and we're lined up for our bolts. So we'll put the 2 10s back in the 12. All right, so we're going to go underneath the car. Pardon the phone. but this is probably the only way you're gonna be able to check this. So you can see we've got a downpipe there that looks factory. What I'm more interested in is this oil pan. You see how there's that perfect circle? That's good news. The jacking point is right up here. A lot of people will accidentally jack on the oil pan and they'll crush this in. If you look underneath the car and you see this not bubbled like it is, if it's flat, or there's any dents in it at all, definitely negotiation point or discussion. The oil pickup tube sits very, very close to that pickup, and it's definitely a point of contention. Other things to inspect, US or JDM, they're always going to have bolster wear here. If it doesn't, it's been cared for really well. Passenger seat's usually pretty mint. Let's talk about these dash vents. This one's got just some small cracks there. You see that one there? This is pretty common. They're inexpensive, but to replace them, they bolt in from the bottom. That over there is an ambient temp sensor. So to replace them, it's a job. So almost everyone has cracked dash vents. Dash pads should not be cracked. If it has, it's been out in the sun a lot. Door panels tend to sag a little bit. They'll sag down here if they haven't been clipped on very well. These will sag as well. This has all got factory components on it, so that looks clean there. Typical scuffing there. Nothing really to otherwise abnormal in the, you know, they almost always, if they're original, that e-brake boot is going to be in bad shape. That's really easy to replace. But other than that, this is all standard and stock. We made our way to the back of the vehicle. What are we looking back here? Some of them will come with a CD changer. That's going to be right there. Back here specifically, the plastic on these 3000 GTs and Stealths hold up pretty well, except for the clip-in for this sunshade, if you will. These tend to deteriorate over time. This one looks pretty good. See, it's a different color though, so it is wearing. They're one screw in and out in the middle here to remove. Not that difficult to find from a dismantler, so it's not a deal breaker, but something to look at. Your electronically controlled suspension, if you're doing any diagnostic, that's underneath here. It's 2 Phillips head screws. Back here, you're gonna have some trays for storage. You've got open storage on this side, and then open storage on this side as well. Sometimes your spare tools are back here. Now, to get to the fuel pump, if you're actually working on this, that's gonna be underneath. We'll just take this up here. Original spare tire. See that tray right down there? There's a couple of screws, I believe it's 4 Phillips, and then you can get to the fuel pump right there. But this all looks original, original tire even. It's all stuff you want to see. There's one more tray there. I'm gonna move those over to there because then that's just out of the way. That way these two sides are open. The last kind of odd thing, and this is a common Mitsubishi problem, is power antennas. When you turn the radio on, the power antenna should come up. If it doesn't, you hear some grinding. There's a plastic guide, almost looks like a zip tie with teeth, that tends to strip out, or the gear strips out. You can get a new antenna motor or just go to a stubby or something. So there you have it, a little bit of a walkthrough. The rest of it is just standard inspection. Check the paint, check for rust. These cars typically don't rust. If there is rust, it's going to be underneath where the cab corners would be. So right where the suspension cradles mount. Typically that's a runaway situation. If there's any sort of rust showing underneath the chassis, it should all be undercoated, but if there's any sort of rust showing along the rockers, again, that's to me a deal breaker. This one's pretty clean, so this was a great example to walk through. One of the nicer ones I've seen probably in the last decade. Unfortunately, down here in Texas, all the 3000 GTs and Stealths that are left are either a project that's been sitting for a decade, or if the paint's good, it's been inside of a garage, but most of them are just sun-baked in really rough shape and stuff I wouldn't touch. So hopefully you found this helpful. Next video, I'll do plugs and wires on this car. That'll probably be up in this corner or over there. I don't know where it's going to be yet. But thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and share and like. Thank you.